Welcome to you in the new video on this channel, and I am thrilled to be here in a one short video, and let me tell you, it's a special one. So a while ago I asked you a question on Twitter about your most complex topics in JavaScript, and many of you replied there loops along with another topics. Well, guess what? Your wish is my command. So after 20 days of anticipation, here we are. In this video, we are not going down the typical way of explaining loops and their types. No. Instead, we are going to breaking down those complex topics in a way that will make sense to you. Like, aha, I get it now. And that's not at all. We are demystifying the underrated topics like what is I in a loop. And believe me, I'll discuss more than 2 minutes on this particular topic. I have put a lot of heart into this video and it's a pack with the love. I have challenges lined up for you after each topics that will make sure those concepts will stick with you. And of course, plenty of more interesting topics as well. You can spot those topics on your screen right now. So grab pen and paper because you are going to take notes, learn the concepts, tackle those challenges with me, and then press the play button again. We are in this together. And don't worry about those annoying like, comment and subscribe notification popping up on your screen. We'll urge about it at the end of this video. So without further ado, let's get into the video right away. And because of this is one short video, that's why I am going to start from the scratch. Now let's start with the first topic, that is control flow. Do you know what is control flow is? In short, we can say that control flow is the order of the code execution. Let's see in the first block of code how JavaScript executes these statements line by line. Like first JavaScript runs the first line of code, then second line of code, then third line of code, then fourth, and so on. Right? Because JavaScript is an interpreter language, as you already know, right? So in this example, the order of the code execution is known as control flow. However, we can also modify or change this control flow manually as per our requirements. That's why control structures come into the existence. Now let's talk about the control structures. In short, the control structures are the concept that help us to manage the control flow in our program. They provide a different practices to control the order of the flow in which instructions or lines of code are executed. There are three kinds of control structures in JavaScript. The first one is sequential structure. In these structures, the code is executed line by line or from top to bottom as it appears in the code base. And this is so simple to understand. In these structures, the control flow will be moved like this, right? This is the control flow of this program. And the second one is selection structure. So in these selection structures, we can select or skip some lines of code according to our needs. We generally use some conditional statements over here to execute a particular block of code according to some condition. Let's suppose if you want to skip these 3 lines of code, right? Then we need to define a condition over here to escape or execute a specific part of the code. Here we can think as the control flow will be moved like this, right? And the third one is repetition structures. Repetition structures, commonly known as loops, that allow us to execute a block of code again and again or multiple times, just like in this approach, right? So by using the loops, we can also change the control flow of a program. And in this video, we are going to talk about repetition structures and different kinds of repetition structures in JavaScript as well, right? But before going into today's agenda, let's learn some basic prerequisite concepts. They are increment and decrement operators. Increment and decrement operators. Well, it seems very simple for you, but many of you get confused sometimes. That's why I am including in this video. One important thing to keep in mind that these operators do not work with constant values. That means if I write plus plus 5 and 6 minus minus, then when JavaScript executes these lines of code, then it will throw an error. Instead, we can store these two values in a separate variable. Let's suppose in a and 6 put inside a b, and now we can apply these increment and decrement operators on these two variables, and it will be work perfectly, right? Now let's talk about increment operators. Increment operator. This 2 plus sign is used to increase the value of a variable by 1, and this operator is itself of two types. We can divide it into two types. The first one is prefix, second one is postfix. And pre means before and post means after, right? You can take it as a note, just like prepaid, postpaid, right? So pre means before and post means after. Let's talk about these two operators. So an operator comes before the variable, then we can call it as a prefix operator, while an operator comes after the variable, then we can call it as a postfix operator. Prefix increment operator increments the variable by 1 and then returns the updated value. The changes of the prefix operator will be applied in the current line. Let's suppose if we have a variable, let a equal to 5. Then if I write a code like plus plus a, then in this line the value of a will be 6, and in the next line, suppose if I am writing a plus plus, then in this line it will be increased by 1 as well, similar to previous one, right? But in the postfix operator it will have the opposite of the prefix operator. Let's suppose again if you have a variable, let a equal to 5, and if I applied a postfix operator over here, that is a plus plus, then the value of the a in this line is similar to the above one, that is 5, and in the next line the value of the a will be increment by 1, that is 6, right? So that is the basic difference between prefix operator and postfix operator. Let me show you in the VS Code. Let's suppose we have a variable that is a, and inside a we have stored it. Now I'm going to write some questions over here, and then we need to guess it, right? CLG a plus plus a plus plus a plus plus. Okay, pause this video and now guess the output of these questions. I hope you have guessed it. Let me write the output of these individual lines of codes. In this line, the value of a will be same as above one, that is 8. Here the value of a will be increment by 1, that is 9. And in this line, the value of a will be increment in the same line, that is 10. And in the last line the value of the a will be 10 as well, but after this line the value of the a will be increment by 1, that is 11. Let me show you CLG a. Now here the value of a will be increment by 1, that is 11. And now let's learn this code, and here is the output: 8, 9, 2 times 10 and 1 times 11. Right? And now let's talk about second operator, that is decrement operator, and this is opposite to the increment operator, right? Let me show you. Now here I am going to talk about decrement operator. We can also divide it into two parts. The first one is prefix and second one is postfix. Pre means before
and post means after. The changes of the postfix operator will be applied after the current line. That means if I write a minus minus, that is postfix, and here the value of, let's suppose the value of a is 5. So in this line, the value of a will be 5 as well. But in the next line, the value of a will be 4, right? But in the prefix operator, let's suppose a equal to again 5. And I am writing minus minus a. The value of a in this line is now becomes 4 because it's a prefix operator, right? You can think it as a prefix operator changes or modifies the variable in the same line, while in the postfix operator changes or modifies of a variable in the next line. That is the main difference between both of them. Let me show you in the VS Code. Let me comment these lines of code, and here I am going to write some again dummy questions. That is a minus minus a, in the next line minus minus a, again a, and minus minus a. Pause this video and guess the output of these questions. I hope you have done it very well. Let me show you in front of you. Here the value of a will be 8. In the next line, the value of the a will be 7, right? And in the third line, the value of a will be 6. And in this line, there is no changes, that is 6. And in the last line, the value of the a will be 6 as well. But after this line, the value of the a will be decreased by 1. Let me show you as well. A, here the value of the a will be 5, here 6. Let's run it, and here is the output. 8, 7, 3 times 6 and 1 times 5, right? So these are the basic difference between increment and decrement operator and its different type, that is prefix and postfix operator. Pre means before, post means after. These are the most important keywords which you need to keep in your mind, right? Now let's learn about the loop, its real use cases and behind the scene. And as you already know that loops are one of the most essential concepts in any programming language that allow us to repeatedly execute a block of code as long as a certain condition is true. Probably you can ask me a question that why loop? So let me tell you, my friends. Let's suppose you want to print the 5 lines of a star pattern just like this. Let me increase the font. Yeah. So now let's suppose you want to print these 5 lines of a star pattern, right? Then how do we print this pattern? By writing 5 lines of code, just like as I am writing over here. Inside it, I am going to write star space star, star space star space star, and star. And let's copy it 5 times. Yeah. And let's run it. And here is the output. Can you print this star pattern using 5 lines of code? No. It's an inefficient way to print these star pattern, and it's not recommended way as well. There is a dry run principle, DRY. D for do not, R for repeat, Y for yourself. Do not repeat yourself, right? Where you have to avoid the code duplication. But here we are breaking the dry principle. So by considering the dry principle, we can leverage the power of loops over here to print this star pattern. In order to print these 5 lines of a star pattern, we can remove the 4 lines of code from here, and we can leverage the power of loops to repeat these lines of code, this 1 line of code, until the certain condition is true. That means we have to repeat this line of code to next 5 times, right? Even more precise way, we can print this star pattern by using a single star sign. We will see later in this video, right? Let's take another example. Let's suppose you have 10 button element right? Button 1, button 2, button 3, 4, 10, right? Let's suppose these are the 10 HTML button elements, and you want to attach an event handlers on each of these buttons. Then how can you do it? Individually? If yes, then again we are breaking the try principle. Instead, we can use the loops over here, right? And this example we'll also see later in this video. It sounds amazing. That's why we must need to learn loops in JavaScript, right? And one more thing I want to tell you, that is I. And you have seen inside a loop, right? Do you know what is I means? It's a good thing to know a little bit about I before learning the actual loop concept. You can think it as I means iterator or index. Iterators means something will keep changing in each iteration. Let's suppose the value of iterator can be changed 1 to 2 in the next iteration, and in the next iteration 3, 4, 5 and so on, right? Instead of I, you can use any variable over here like A, B, C, D, E, F and so on, right? But I is a convention, and many developers or programmers generally use I inside a loop. But one thing keep in your mind, that I is not a keyword. It's just a normal variable, right? Let's suppose I want to print the table of 2, just like 2 into 1 equal to 2, 2 into 2 equal to 4, 2 into 3 equal to 6, 2 into 4 equal to 8 and so on, right? Then here you have noticed that I am using 1 and 2 in each iteration. So these values can be stored inside the I, right? And in each iteration we can apply some logic to print these 2, 4, 6, 8 values. Also we can iterate the value of I from reverse, like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6 and so on, right? The value of I can be start from anywhere. It's not mandatory to start it from 1, right? It can be start from 5, 6, 7, 8 and so on. So this is the basic idea of using I inside a loop, and I hope you don't have any doubt right now what is I inside a loop. Now let's see the different kinds of loops in JavaScript. And for your information, there are 5 kinds of loops in JavaScript. Let's see one by one. The first one is while loop. And as you already know, the basic behavior of a loop is used to execute a block of code or lines of code again and again until a certain condition is true. Let's learn this loop with a real world problems. I want to print the table of 2, just like this, right? Let me increase the font of this table. Now I want to print this table into the console using while loop, right? Let's forget while loop for now, but focus on the behavior of this pattern, right? Let's suppose this is a column 1, this is a column 2 and this is a column 3. In the first column, do you notice there is a same constant is repeating again and again? Oh, so can I say that this is a constant, right? In the second column, did you notice the counting is incrementing by 1 in each iteration, from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5 and so on till 10. So can I say that it's the I? Because we have already know that if you find any pattern like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and vice versa is also true, then we can say that this is the value of I, right? And the value of I is starting from 1 and ending at the 10th position, right? So can I say that this is the initial value, and the value of I is incrementing in each iteration by 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1 till 10. And do you know how can we increment a variable by 1 in each iteration? Using increment or decrement operator. If you want to decrement by 1, then we can use decrement operator. Otherwise, if you want to increase a variable by 1, then we should use increment operator. So here we need to increment these values by 1 according to some condition, right? Let's suppose in the first iteration the value of I is 1, right? Then first we need to initialize this loop with 1. Then we need to check a condition that 1 is less than or equal to 10, because of the last number is 10, right? So we need to check this condition in the second step, and if it is true, then we need to multiply this constant with I, that is 1, in the next iteration. Now let's suppose the value of I is 2. Again check 2 is less than 10. If it is true, then again we need to multiply this constant with the value of I, because now the value of I becomes 2, and these steps going till 9, and in the next iteration the value of I becomes 10. And now let's check this condition again. 10 is less than 10. Yes, it is true. Then again multiply constant with 10, right? And in the next iteration the value of I becomes 11. Again check the condition. 11 is less than 10. No. And now the loop will be terminated. Do you notice one thing? How can I increment the value of I? By adding 1 in each iteration, right? And how can I add 1 to a variable in each iteration? Using increment operator. So can I say that there are 3 components of a loop? The first one is initial value, and the second one is a condition, and the last one is an increment or a decrement operator, that is used to increment the value of I or decrement the value of I according to our requirements. Let me write again on this page. According to me, there are 3 main components of a loop. The first one is initial value, and the second one is a condition, and the third one is an increment or a decrement operator. And if we skip any of these components, then our loop can be iterated infinitely, and we do not want to execute a piece of code infinitely, because that breaks our application. So these 3 things we need to keep in mind in order to avoid infinitely loop iteration. So now let's see the actual syntax or control flow of the while loop. The syntax of the while loop is so simple. Just write a keyword over here, while, and inside the parenthesis of while we need to pass a condition that will be evaluated either true or false. And inside the curly braces of the while loop we need to write our logic, and at the end of this logic we need to define, or we need to increase or decrease the iteration, I plus plus or I minus minus. But before starting the while loop, we need to initialize the value of I. So let I equal to 1. So the control flow of the while loop will be start from this line and then goes to this line, and here condition will be checked first, and then the lines of code inside the curly braces will be executed if the condition is true. So after the condition, the control flow go inside curly braces of the while loop, and then our logic will be executed one time. Then the value of I will be increment, then again condition will be check, then logic, then I, then again condition, logic I, again condition, logic I, again condition, logic I, again condition, and if the condition is false, then this loop will be terminated and the next line will be executed now after this while loop, right? So this is the basic control flow of the while loop, and I hope you don't have any doubt in this control flow, right? So now let's solve this problem into VS Code. Let's see. Now let's paste our requirement over here. Now I want to print these whole things into this console log, right? Using while loop. So our first component of the loop is initialization. So let's initialize our loop with 1. So let I equals to 1. In the second step, we need to define a condition over here. Our condition will be I is going to iterate from 1 to 10. So let's put it inside the parenthesis of the while. Our condition is I is less than or equal to 10. And inside the parenthesis, we need to define a logic and increment the value of I in each iteration. That is the third component of the loop, right? So let's write a console log over here, that is CLG. Inside the template literal, we can pass these things, and this will be a constant and it will be a variable. So let's put it inside curly braces, and it's a variable, so I can be a variable. And here again we need to define a expression inside a template literal 2 into I, and that's it. And in the last step, we need to increment the value of I in each iteration using increment operator, I plus plus, and that's it. Our requirement has been done, right? Let's run it, and boom, there is the output. But I have a challenge for you. Can you print this same thing but in the reverse order, just like this? Can you print it? Pause this video here and try to solve this problem by yourself. Let me help you a little bit, right? So in the first column, it will be a constant. In the second column, I, and now I is starting from 10, right? And in the next iteration, we need to decrease by 1 by 1 by 1 by 1 in each iteration. So in this case, we need to use decrement operator, right? And now I hope you know how can you solve this. Try to solve it yourself and then start this video from here, right? And I hope you have solved this problem by yourself. If not, then please head over to the description box of this video and see the GitHub repository according to this challenge. By the way, this is a challenge 1. We'll see more challenge in this video. And now let's move to the next types of loop, that is do while loop, right? The do while loop is very similar to while loop, but there is a subtle difference between both of them. In the while loop, if the condition is false, then the code written inside the curly braces of the while loop will be not executed even one time. But in this case, if the condition is false, then the code written inside the curly braces will be at least executed one time, right? So this is the very basic difference between do while loop and the while loop. So first we have to write a do. Do is a keyword and open parenthesis. Here we need to write statements or lines of code, right? And again we need to use one of the most essential component of the loop, that is increment or decrement operator, right? And then close this curly braces, and at the end of this line, here we need to again define a keyword, that is while. Parenthesis of the while, we need to define a condition over here. If the condition is true, then the statement will be executed again. If the condition is false, then this statement will be not executed second time. But before the condition is checked, this statements or lines of code has been already executed one time. So this is the most important thing that you need to keep in your mind while using do while loop in your code base. But did you notice one thing? We did not define one of the most essential component of the loop, that is initialization of this loop. So let's initialize this loop as well. So let I equals to 1. You can put anything over here like 0, 5, 10 as your requirements, right? But for now I am writing 1 at the initial value of this loop. The control flow of the do while loop will be starting from this line and goes inside the curly braces without the condition check, right? And then the statements of the do while loop will be executed, and after the execution of the statements, then increment or decrement operator will be executed. That means without the condition checking, we are incrementing or decrementing the value of I, and after the incrementing or decrementing, the condition of this do while loop will be checked. If the condition is true, then these statements will be executed again, and then increment or decrement operator will be applied. Then again condition, statements, increment, condition, statements, increment, condition, statements until this condition is true. If the condition is false, the control flow of this loop will be terminated and the next line after this loop will be executed. So this is the basic control flow of this do while loop. Let's see an example. So here is our previous example. Here again I am going to print this table of 2 using do while loop. So let's see how we can print this table of 2 using do while loop, right? As you already know that we need to find 3 things. The first one is initial value, and the second one is a condition, and the last one is we need to increment or decrement the value of this initial value. So in this example, the value of I will be incrementing by 1 in each iteration, right? And the initial value of the I is 1. So let's put it over here. And the last value of the I is 10. Last value. So we need to iterate the value of I in each iteration and increment the value of I by 1, right? So let's put a condition over here. If I is less than equal to 10, I means 1, 2, 3 till 10. So in the first iteration, the value of I will be 1. If it is true, then multiply the constant with I, that is 1. And now we'll get our result, right? And in the end of this loop, we need to increment the value of I, that is I plus plus. But also we can increment the value of I by writing I plus 1. Both are same, but in loop we generally use this increment or decrement operator. That's why I am using this operator, right? Now let's see what will be happen if the condition is false. And if you already know the control flow of the do while loop, it first execute the lines of code, right? And then the condition will be checked. So let's suppose the value of I is 10, right? From here I am going to initialize my loop. And inside the curly braces of the do while loop, just I am printing the value of I. And at the end of the curly braces, I'm writing some falsy condition. Let's write false directly, right? Now the condition of this loop is false. But do you know, this loop will be executed at least one time. That means we will see 10 into our console. I'm repeating it just because of this is very important concept in do while loop, right? So you must need to keep in your mind. Let's see the code inside of VS Code, right? So first here we need to initialize our loop from 1, right? And write the keyword do, and inside the parenthesis we need to define our logic. CLG, let's copy it from here. And the second essential component is increment or decrement operator in this do while loop. So I'm going to write over here I plus 1 or I plus plus, and at the end here we need to write a keyword while, and inside the parenthesis of while we need to define a condition, that is I is less than equal to 10, and that's it. And I have also a challenge for you that is similar to the last one, but this time you have to use do while loop. Just pause the video and try to solve it yourself and then continue this video from here. And I am very sure you have done it very well. Now let's talk about the next type of loop, which is for loop, right? And as you already know, generally there are three main components of a loop. The first one is initial value, the second one is a condition, and the third one is I plus plus or I minus minus, that is increment or decrement operator. In other words, we can say that iterator, right? Thankfully, the for loop provides these three components with their own syntax. Let me show you the syntax of the for loop. First, need to write for keyword, and inside the parenthesis of the for, we need to provide three things. In other words, we need to provide our three main components of a loop. The first one is initial value or initialization. Initial value and semicolon, or the second component of a loop is condition. Then again semicolon, and the third component of a loop is iterator, that is I plus plus or I minus minus. We write over here general name iterator, and let's open the curly braces, and inside these curly braces we just need to write our logic or lines of code. No need to write at the end of the code I plus plus or I minus minus. So it's very simple to use syntax, right? We need to provide three main components in a single line, right? So that's why generally most of the people love to use the for loop in their code base. And from the next time onwards, I will always use for loop now in this video, right? Now let's see the control flow of the for loop. The first loop will be started from the initial value, and then condition will be checked, right? If the condition is true, then the control will move inside the curly braces of the for loop, and after execution of these statements or logic, then the value of I will be incremented or decremented according to our needs, and then again condition will be checked. If true, then again lines of statement, then iterator, again condition. If it is again true, then it will again executed these lines of code, and again I plus plus or I minus minus. And if the condition is false, then the control flow of the for loop will be terminated, and the next line after this for loop will be executed, right? So this is the basic control flow of the for loop. And one more thing I want to tell you, since the loops are used the initial variable only once, and I hope you already know during learning while and do while loops, remember we use the variable I only once to initialize the while or do while loop, right? However, to iterate the while or do while loop multiple times, we use increment or decrement operator, right? Remember, as a result, inside this for loop, we can also store the initial value in a separate variable outside of these two curly braces, similar to the while and do while loops. That means we can define initial value before the for loop, let I equals to 1 and keep the first part of this for loop blank, which is perfectly a valid syntax. Now let's take an example. Let's suppose I want to print the even number from 1 to 20. Then how can we solve this problem by using for loop? Let's find the three components first. First of all, we have to find our initial value, right? And the second component will be a condition. And the last component will be iteration, that is I plus plus or I minus minus. So in this case, we need to increment the value of I by 1 in each iteration. So let's write immediately I plus plus. Now in this case, the initial value will be 1. We can also start it from 2, but let's keep it 1, right? And now the second component is the condition. Here we need to check a condition. That means we need to iterate this loop from 1 to 20 according to condition. So let's write I is less than equal to 20, right? And inside the curly braces of the for loop, again we need to check a condition. So the logic can be, let's check if I modules means remainder is equal to 0. If true, then print the value of I, else just null. And that's it. This is the simple logic of this problem. Let's solve it inside the VS Code. So here first we need to define initial value, that is let I equals to 1. But in our case, we can also define this initial value inside the for loop, right? For parenthesis, and here we need to define an initial value, and we have already defined, so let's keep it as blank. And the second one is condition, I less than equal to 20, and the last one is I plus plus. Inside the curly braces of this group, need to define a condition one more time, because we need to print the even number from 1 to 20. So let's check if I modules 2 is equal to 0. If yes, then print the value of I, else just null. And that's it. Let me run it. And here is the output. But as you already know, we can also put this variable inside this loop. Let's comment it and the output will be same. And now the time's come for the challenge. I have a challenge for you. This time you have to print this pattern. This is challenge number 3. You need to print the odd number this time from 1 to 20 using for loop. Pause this video and try to solve it yourself, and I hope you have solved this problem by yourself. If not, then head over to the description box of this video and see the GitHub repository, right? So now let's talk about the next type of loop, which is for in loop, and this is a more advanced loop than the previous ones. Here you do not need to care about those 3 components of the loop. Those we learned during implementing while, do while and for loops. They are initial value, and second one is condition, and the third one was what? Iterator. In this case, we do not need to care about these 3 things. So you might have a question like, then what will be the use of this for in loop? So let me tell you, my friends, and this is one of the most important sentence that you need to keep in your mind. This for in loop works with an object. Just keep this sentence in your mind, right? For in loop works with an object. But before learning about the for in loop, let's talk a little bit about an object in JavaScript. First, how can you declare an object in JavaScript? It's so simple. Just we need to define a variable. Let's say const my object, then equals to, and open this curly braces. Inside this curly braces, we need to define properties and methods in the form of key and value pairs. So it can be like key 1 colon value 1 comma key 2 colon value 2 comma. We can also define a function inside an object, and this function is known as method in JavaScript. So let's define a method as well. Method 1 colon function parenthesis and open this curly braces. In this declaration, before this colon, we generally call it as a key, right? These are known as key, and after this colon, we can call it as a value or values. But if we combine both of them, this is known as property. This is also known as a property. And the last one is known as a method. That means if I combine simple key and values pair, then we can call it as a property. Or if I combine a function with a key, then it will call it as a method, right? By the way, I am also planning to create a one-shot video about object in JavaScript similar to this video. If you are interested, then leave a comment in the comment box of this video. Just write I am interested in the comment box of this video, and we'll make a detailed video about that topic as well. Now let's write this object once again, and let's see how foreign loops work on this object, right? All right. So here is the basic illustration of the object in JavaScript, and let's see how foreign loops works on this object. And as you already know, we can call these two things combinedly as properties. Let's write prop1. Similar to above one, we can also call it as a prop2. Although this is a method, but this time let's call it as a prop3. Similar to above one, we can also call it as a prop4. Now the foreign loop is used to iterate over the properties of an object. It allows us to execute a block of code for each property in the object. We'll see later the syntax of the foreign loop, but inside the curly braces of the foreign loop, whatever we'll put, the logic will be executed for each properties for this object. And this is the main advantage of using foreign loop when you want to iterate the properties of the object, right? Let's see the syntax of the foreign loop. One more thing before colon, by the way, this is a colon because it's a dummy, that's why I write equal to sign over here, but here you have to write colon, right? Before this colon, we generally known as this part as the key, and the second part or after the colon we can call it as a value, and this is the name of the object. The syntax of the foreign loop is very simple. Just write a keyword for, then open parenthesis. Inside this parenthesis we need to define three things. The first one is a variable that is responsible for executing the key or the name of the property in each iteration. And the next element of this for loop is a in keyword, and the last element is object name, and open the curly braces. Inside these curly braces we can define our logic. This is a simple variable. We can define this variable with const or let or var keyword, and this variable will be redeclared in each iteration automatically, right? And this is a simple object name, as I already discussed to you. So this is the simple syntax of the foreign loop. But you might have a doubt, what will be happen if I declare this variable with the const keyword? It will throw an error. That means if I want to declare this variable, let's say the name of the variable is key. So let's write here const key. But if you know JavaScript a little bit, then you already know that if I declare a variable with the const keyword, we can't reassign in future. But here, the value of this variable will be changed in each iteration. Then how it possible? So let me tell my friends, the const keyword inside this foreign loop is not reassigning a new value to the existing variable. Instead, it declares a new variable, that is key, within the scope of this foreign loop in each iteration, and it does not conflict any existing variables. That's why you can use any keyword to declare the variable inside the foreign loop. Now let's talk about the actual control flow of the foreign loop. So we have to create an object for this time as well. Alright, so this is the basic illustration of the object. So I have already told you that inside foreign loop, we do not need to care about those three components of the loop. That means it will automatically increment the value of I, and inside the curly braces of the foreign loop, we can apply the condition according to our requirements. So in the foreign loop, the control flow will be a start from the property 1 of the object, then it will move to the second property and third property and so on. And it will increment the value of I. That means, let's suppose the value of I is here 1 and here 2. And the last one has 3. So it will automatically increase the value of I by 1. We do not need to manually increment the value of iterator, right? So that's the benefit of using for loop if you want to work with object. Let's take an example. Let's suppose we have an object like this. The name of the object is simple object, and it has two properties and a method. Right? Let's assume this is a property 1 and this is a property 2, and let's consider it as a property 3 as well. And now I want to print on the screen or console output like this. It seems very simple, but let me tell my friends, it's not as simple as you think. But before going into the foreign loop, do you know how to access the value from the object? So we have two ways, right? Let me change the pen. The first one is using dot operator. Let's suppose if you want to access the first name of the user by using dot name, so it's so simple. First we need to write the name of the object, that is object and dot, and the name of the key, that is first name. And it will return the value associated with these keys, right? That is AJAY, Ajay. And the second way is bracket notation. So in this case, we have to write again the name of the object, that is object. And instead of dot, here we have to include a square bracket. And by wrapping them into quotes, we can pass the name of the keys. So here I can pass first name, and it will also return the first name of this user, that is Ajay. But inside the foreign loop, dot operator or notation will no longer work. Inside the foreign loop, bracket notation will be used. And we'll also tell you why dot notation will not work and bracket notation is working perfectly. Let's see inside the VS Code what do I mean, right? So first let's create an object very quickly. So let's const object. So this is the object. Now how can we access the value from this object? So it's so simple. CLG, name of the object and the keys by using dot operator. Let's run and done. Similarly, we can also access the last name of the user, and also we can access or we can invoke the method from the object as well, that is full, and we need to use parenthesis over here. Let's run and boom. Now let's see how we can access the value by using for in loop. So first we need to write a keyword, that is for open parenthesis. Inside this parenthesis we need to pass three things. The first one is the name of the variable to hold the each keys from this object. So let's define as a key, and the second element is in keyword, and the last one is the name of the object, that is object. Open curly braces. Inside this curly braces we can perform our logic. So let's print the key from this object, that is CLG and key, and done. Let's run, and here is the key, right? And once I get the keys from this object, we can perform our any logic according to our requirements or needs. Now let's see, can I use dot operator inside the for in loop? Let's see, can I get actual output according to our expectation? CLG and the name of the object, right? And dot operator and the name of the keys. Let's run, and we'll get undefined in each iteration. Why? So let me tell my friends, I have already told you a concept, that is this is the variable and it is changing in each iteration, or it is redeclaring in each iteration, right? So in JavaScript, when you want to access a property of an object using a variable, this is a variable, right? So you should use a square brackets and the variable name like object and a square bracket and the name of the variable, while using dot notation such as object dot key is used when you have a known property and not a variable representing the property name, right? And this syntax will be work perfectly outside of this for in loop, right? In the context of a for in loop, you are iterating over the properties of the object, and key is the variable that holds the current property name. And what is the property name? First name, last name, full name. Therefore, we need to use a square brackets to access the value from this object. That's why this is not working. But if I pass this syntax over here, so it will be work perfectly. But here is our requirement. I want to print in the console something like this. How can you do it? Do you have any idea? Just pause and try to solve it yourself, then continue the video from here, right? Now let's solve it. So this is the name of the key and this is a value, and the last one is the name of the method and their values. So let's check CLG inside the template literal. First print the name of the property, that is key, and colon, and again in the next expression we need to print the value according to this key. So let's write object, a square bracket and the key. It will be work or not? Let's check. For properties it will working perfectly, but in the last one as a method it will not work as expected. Then how can you do it? So here we have to use some conditional. Let's check first the type of this method. CLG type of object dot full name, right? And it's a function. Let's apply a logic inside this for in loop that if I get a method in some iteration, we will call this method by using parenthesis, and in that iteration that is not a method, then we can normally execute the values. So let's check if type of object and their key is equal to a function, that is this string, If it is true, then we need to call this method by using parentheses, right? So let's write CLG object and square brackets key, and here we need to pass a parenthesis. In this way, we can call the method from this object. If not, then we can normally access the value according to the key by using object square brackets key, and I think it will be work perfectly now. Let's save and run it, and boom. But we can also improve these lines of code by using ternary operator. Let's copy this condition and put it over here and check. If it is true, then print this line of code, else print this line of code. Let's save it, and the output will be same. Now the time comes for the challenge. Challenge number 4. I have an object for you, that is this object, and you have to print the output from this object like this. Here you have to print the object in the form of table, and inside this object I have wrapped 3 objects inside an array. In other words, this array is a combination of array of objects, right? So now let's pause this video, and after solving this problem you can continue this video from here. Great job. I hope you have completed this challenge as well. If not, then head over to the description box of this video and see the GitHub repository. Now let's talk about the last type of loop, which is for of loop. And this is also an advanced loop where we do not need to care about those 3 essential components of loop. So what is the actual use of this loop? So in short, the for of loop is used to execute a sequence of iterable object. But what is iterable object? Iterable object means collection of iterators. That means collection of iterators. But here is also a new word. What is iterators? Let me show you what is iterable objects and iterators. Suppose we have an array, const array 10, 20, 30, 40 and 50. So in this example, 10, 20, 30, 40 and 50 are known as iterators, and array is known as iterable object, right? So this is the difference between iterable object and iterators. So for of loop is used to execute a lines of code or block of code for each iterator in the given object. Got it? However, an iterable object is not limited to just an array. There's more available as well, such as a string, HTML collection, node list, argument object, map and set object, and etc. etc. These are some basic examples of the iterable object. Right? Whenever you want to work with this type of iterable objects, definitely you can iterate these objects by using for of loop along with those while, do while and for loop, right? Let's see the syntax of this loop. So similar to last one, we have to put a for keyword, then parenthesis. Inside this parenthesis, we need to pass 3 things. The first one is a variable, and the second one is of keyword, and the last one is the object name, and open this curly braces. and inside this curly braces we can apply our logic, and this logic will be executed for each iterators of the iterable objects. Got it? And similar to for in loop, each iteration creates a new variable. That means we can also create this variable by using const, let, and var keyword. And this variable holds the items or iterators from the object in each iteration. Let's suppose in the last example we have 10, 20, 30, 40 and 50. So these variables holds 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 in each iteration, and then we can apply the logic to perform any specific logic inside the code, right? Now let's see what will be the control flow of this for loop. So it's so simple. It will start from the item 1 of the object, that is 10, then it will move to the item 2 and 3, 4, 5 and so on automatically. That means the value of I will be incrementing by 1 in each iteration automatically. So this is a very simple control flow of this for in loop. Let me show you inside the VS Code. So let me define an array const, and let's write the for of loop for parenthesis and the name of the variable, let's say item, and the keyword of, and the name of the object, that is arr. Open parenthesis. Inside the parenthesis we can apply our logic. Let's check what will be the value of item in each iteration. CLG item. Let's save and run it, and here is the output 10, 20, 30 and 40. Once we get the each item from this array, we can apply any logic inside these curly braces. Now the time has come for the challenge. We have an array that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 10, and we want to print this element inside the console. Pause this video and try to solve it yourself. And I hope you have solved this problem as well. If not, then head over to the description box of this video and see the GitHub repository, right? When we use a loop, there's always a worry that it might never stop running. And if the block of code is executing infinite number of times, then this behavior is known as infinite loop, right? And it causes many problems such as consuming CPU resources, bad user experience, application can be crashes, and memory can be leaked, and etc. etc. To prevent this, it is essential to write code with clear exit from this loop, right? So how can we avoid from the infinite loop? Let's suppose I am printing the counting from 1 to 5, 3, 4, 5. And because of some reason it is not stopped here. Instead it is executing after the 5 an infinite number of times. So what will be the main reason to this behavior? So according to me, there are two reasons. The first one is, if I did not increment the value of I in each iteration, then the same item will be executed again and again like an infinite loop. So let's write here iteration, right? And the second one is a condition. If the condition is always true, then again our loop will be not stopped, causing infinite loops. And I have already discussed with you, there are three main components of a loop. The first one is initial value, second one is a condition, and the third one is iterator. So here the second one and the third one are the most essential component to avoid infinite loops. Let me show you inside the VS Code, right? So I'm going to use for loop. So let's start this loop from 1. Let I equals to 1, and it will goes up to 5. And in each iteration, I'm going to increment the value of I. And inside this curly braces, just I'm going to print the value of I. If this condition is always becomes true, then this loop will be executing infinite number of times. But now, because of some reason or by mistake, I changed this sign to this sign and this value to 1. And let's run it. And here is the infinite loops. So I want to tell you that condition is the one of the most essential component to prevent the infinite loops. And the next one is iterator. If I remove this, let's back to the previous condition, that is this one, and let's remove the iterator from here. Let's run it, and again here we are in infinite loops. In short, if you did not define these two components carefully, then it may cause for the infinite loops. So keep two things in your mind during working with loops. The first one is a condition and the second one is an iterator. Let's see the control flow of this code, right? So this loop is starting from 1, right? And 1 is less than equal to 5. First time it is true, and then it will enter to the curly braces of this for loop and it will printing 1 first time. And because of there is no increment or decrement operator, so the value of I will be not incremented, and again the value of I will be 1, and this time again true, then again print 1, and it will goes infinitely, just like this. Now let's talk about the next topic, which is nesting of loops. Nesting loops means placing one or more loops inside another loop. Let's suppose we have an outer loop 1, and if I put one more loop inside this loop, then we can call it as a nesting of loop, right? And this allows us to create a complex control structure just like this. In JavaScript, we generally use while and for loops to create nesting loops, right? So let's see inside an example what do I mean, right? Now let's suppose I want to print this pattern inside the console. But did you notice two things? The first thing is that I am repeating this same line. Let's say the name of this line is R1, row 1 is 4 times. And the second thing is that I am repeating the same string star and a space 4 times as well. So why not we use two loops, one for printing rows, loop 1, and another one for printing this star sign, that is loop 2. Got it? Loop 1 is responsible to print these rows and loop 2 is responsible to print this star sign. Let's say the name of this row is R1, R2, R3, R4 and R5. That means in the first loop, need to iterate the loop from 1 to 5. So here the initial value is 1 and the last value will be 5. And inside the second loop, need to iterate this same string star and a space for more times, right? Let's say this is I 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So here again this loop will be iterating from 1 to 5. The initial value of this loop will be 1 and the last value will be 5. And in each iteration need to concatenate this string into the existing string. And now, as you already know, the first loop is responsible for printing rows and the second loop is responsible for printing a star sign. So in the first loop, let's say the value of I is 1. Then inside the second loop, it will be iterated 5 times to printing this star sign. In other words, if the outer loop will be executed 1 time, then the inner loop will be executed how many times? 5 times to print this 5 star sign. Got it? So it will be the basic control flow of these nesting loops. And when the value of I 2, then again the second loop or inner loop will be executed 5 more times. So this control flow will be depends on this outer loop or inner loop as well. If the value of I will be 5, then in this iteration the inner loop will be again executed 5 more times, and in the next iteration if the value of I becomes 6, then this control flow will be terminated. Let's see inside the VS Code. So here we are going to define a nesting loops. By the way, I am using a for loop. So let's define the outer loop. Let's I is going to start from 1 and this I will go till 5. And in the each iteration, I am going to increment the value of I. Let's open this parenthesis. The outer loop is responsible for printing what? Row. So let's define a row equals to an empty string, and this empty string responsible for holding the star sign and a space. And in the inner loop, let's define for loop as well, and here let's say j equals to 1, and this is also going to start from 1 to 5. J is less than equal to 5, and of course we need to increment the value of j in each time. Here we need to concatenate the star sign, a star and a space, and this string will be stored in this row in each iteration. Got it? So let's write here row equals to row plus this string. Also we can improve this code like this: row plus equals to a star and a space. Let's comment it. Both are same, by the way, right? Let's save, and at the end of this code we need to console log this row, ROW, and that's it, and boom, here is the output. Still, if you did not understand, then don't worry, we'll discuss more about it later in this video, right? Have you noticed that once I initiate this loop, it continues until it reaches last iterator of this object, right? But what should I do if I want to stop execution before reaching to the end of this loop? That's where break and continue keywords are come into play, right? So now let's talk about the break statement first. Let's suppose we have a loop 1, and if this loop is encounter a break statement, then the control flow of this loop will be terminated and the next line after this loop will be executed. Now let's suppose you have hunger for 4 Indian breads, also known as roti or chapati, right? So roti is equal to 4. Now your mom is serving you 10 rotis to eat, but you want only what? 4. So here you can tell your mother that I want more rotis if the number of roti is less than 4. So here I want more, but if the number is equal to 4, then I don't want it anymore. So let's see inside the VS Code what do I mean. So here again I am going to use a for loop. So let roti is equal to 1. Let's say initially we have 1 roti and my mom is serving 10 rotis to me. So roti is going to iterate from 1 to what? 10. And in the each iteration I am going to increment the value of I, that is roti, by 1. Roti plus plus. Inside this curly braces we need to define our logic or condition. If the roti is less than 4, then need to print a string that is the number of roti. Else if the roti is equal to 4, then need to print again a string smiley, else the number of roti. Now let's save and run it. Did you notice one thing? It will execute some extra iteration that we do not want. We only want that stop the execution of this loop after this line of code. So how can you do it? That's why break statement come into the picture. After this line, we need to implement or use a break statement. So after this line, here we need to use a break statement, and that's it. And if I run this code, then we'll get only this 4 string, right? Let's run it, and here is the output. And after this line, it will be not executed because the loop encounter break statement, and break statement is used to break the control flow of this loop or get out the control flow after this loop. That means after this line of code, that is 169. So if I write over here CLG first, so after this line of code, first string will be printed as the output. Let's run it. Here is the output. So the control flow will be moved in this code like loop will be started from 1, then it will check 1 is less than 10, true. Then it will enter into these curly braces, then it checks if 1 is less than 4, yeah, it is true. Then in the first iteration, this line of code will be executed 1 time, 2 time as well, 3 time as well, and if row t is equal to 4, 4 is less than 4, no. This time it is wrong. Then it will move to the next block of code, that is this else if code. If 4 is equal to 4, yeah, it is true. Then this line of code will be executed, then it will encounter a break statement. And once the control flow encounter the break statement, then the control flow will be get out from this loop, and the code written outside or below this line of code will be executed, right? So this is the basic control flow of this break statement. If the break statement is encountered, then this control flow of this for loop or any loop will be terminated directly. So this is the main thing you need to keep in your mind, right? And similar to break statement, we have another keyword, that is continue keyword. Let's see inside the VS Code, then we'll talk about the control flow of this loop, right? So let's see. Let's suppose I am taking this example as well this time. So let's write for let row t is equal to 1 if row t is less than equal to 10 and row t plus plus, and inside this parenthesis I want to print a special string if I get the number 4 or if I get the number of row t is equal to 4. So let's write a condition. If row t is equal to 4, then print a string that is only 4 row t's, else row t. Let's run it. But did you notice one thing, that I am repeating this 4 2 times? So if I apply a keyword continue over here, so this last 4 will be ignored. Let's run it, and here is the output. I want to print a special string if I got only 4 row t's, and I do not care before and after the 4 row t's. Let's see the control flow of this loop as well, right? So similar to last one, it will also start from 1, and 1 is less than 10, yeah, true. Then it will enter into these curly braces and then check if 1 is equal to 4, no. Then it will print this row t. So 1, then again the value of I or row t will be incremented by 1, that is 2. 2 is less than 10, yes. Here is also wrong, and again 2 will be printed into the console, and 3 as well. And if the 4 is less than 10, yes, then it will print this string into this console, and then it will encounter a continue keyword. Unlike break statement, if the loop will encounter a continue keyword, instead going out of this loop, it will move to this iterator, and then the value of the I will be incremented by 1, and then again condition will be checked. So that is the basic difference between break and continue keyword. The difference between both of them are very simple. If the control flow will encounter continue keyword, so instead of getting out from this loop, it will go to this iterator and it will increment the value of I, then it will again check the value of I, then it will enter into this loop. But when a loop encounter a break keyword, then it will get out from this loop and the lines of code after this loop will be executed. Apart from those 5 types of traditional loops in JavaScript, there are also some higher order functions or methods that work on the principle like traditional loops in JavaScript, such as map, filter, reduce, for each method, sort, and a string method, that is repeat function. They all work very similar to traditional loops. However, they are not considered as a traditional loops for 2 reasons. The first one is they abstract the actual implementation of the loop. Remember those 3 main components of a loop? During using these methods, we did not care about those 3 main components of a loop. First one was initial value, second one was condition, and third one was iterator. We did not care about these 3 components of a loop during working with map, filter, reduce, and other methods, right? And the second reason is that most of them are except a caller function as an argument, except this repeat function. This repeat function is not except callback function. However, these 5 methods accept a callback function. But did you pass any callback function to the traditional loops like while, do while, or for? No, right? That's why they are not considered as a traditional loops. Instead, they are special functions or methods. By the way, these methods are most useful. We must know about them and we'll create a one-shot video on this topic as well. Just like this video, right? So please wait for that videos as well. Now let's see how we can use any loops inside a DOM. Let's suppose we have 10 buttons, just like this, right? Button 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So now I want to attach an event handler to each of these given button, right? In other words, when I click on this button, I want to change the background color of this button, PG, and their text as well, using any loops, right? So we need to do 2 things. The first one is we need to select these all buttons just like an array. And in the second step, we need to iterate this array using any loops to attach event handlers to the individual buttons, right? So here need to loop and attach event handlers. So let's see inside the VS Code, right? So let's create a folder called project, and inside this folder need to create 3 files. The first one is index.html, second one is style.css, and the last one is script.js. Let's collapse this section, and inside this HTML let's include boilerplate code. And inside the body, we need to create how many buttons? 10 buttons. So container button dot button, or let's ignore class for now. And here button $, and that's it. Let's copy multiple times. So here I have created 10 buttons, right? Now let's design a little bit and then jump directly onto the JavaScript, right? So now let's directly jump into the JavaScript file, but before we need to what? Need to include this script file with index.html, right? So let's include script src script.js. I need to add a keyword defer. And now we are ready to work with these JavaScript files. Got it? So first we need to select what? Those 10 buttons using query selector all as a node list. And node list is very similar to array like element, right? So let's write this code. Const all buttons equals to document dot query selector all, and here I need to define selector, that is button, and it will return a what? Node list. Let's see inside the console clg all buttons, and here is the node list, right? Now let's again, I'm going to use a for loop over here, but for you as a challenge I will give some another loops, right? So let's write for loop for let I is going to start from what? 0, just like an array element, right? And I is less than all buttons dot what? Length. All buttons dot length means 10th in this case, right? And in each iteration need to iterate the value of I, that is I plus plus. Now inside this parenthesis of this for loop, we need to add an event handler to each of these buttons. So let's write all buttons square brackets and the I. If the value of I is 0, then it will select the first button. If the value of I is 1, then second, and so on, right? And we need to attach event handlers using add event listeners. So let's add a click event, and it will accept a caller function. Inside this caller function, we need to do two things. The first one is we need to change this background color when I click on this button. So how can you do it? So it's so simple. All buttons and I dot style dot background color. Let's define green for now. And the next one is we need to change this text of this button. So let's write again all buttons I dot text content change to, let's say, clicked, and that's it. Let's save it and let's check. Perfect. Let's click on the next button, and we have created our desired result. Now the time comes for the challenge. This time you have to build the same project but using different loops. In this challenge you have to use for of loop. Now let's pause this video and try to build this project by yourself. If not, then head over to the description box of this video and see the GitHub repository, right? And I hope you have built this project yourself successfully. Now let's move on to the next topic. But before going into the solve actual star pattern, I would like to introduce two things. The first one is a repeat function, and the second one is a string concatenation. So let's see first, and then we'll see how to solve any star pattern. Got it? So the first one is a string method, that is repeat method. As the name suggests, repeat, that means it will repeat the given string according to the given arguments, right? So let's suppose we have a string a star, and on this string I'm going to use this repeat function repeat 3. That means it will return the same string 3 times, that is 3 times a star. Let's see inside the VS Code. Now let's suppose we have a string that is a star and a space, and I want to repeat the same string 5 times. So instead of using for loop, we can use a repeat function. So let's use dot repeat and parenthesis. Inside this parenthesis, we need to define the number of counts. That means how many times we want to repeat this string. That is 5 times. Let's store this inside a variable. Is const star. Let's log it into the console clg star, and here is the output. So please take this method as a note in your notebook. Got it? Now let's talk about the second thing, that is concatenation. Concatenation means combining two or more string into a single string, and that's it. Let's suppose we have a string, let str1 equals to aj, and the second string is str2 ay, right? So now we can combine or join these two strings into a single string using concatenate method or plus operator. So generally I use plus operator to concatenate two or more strings. So let's write clg str1 plus str2, and that's it. That is the output. Also we can use concat method, but in this video I'm not going to use any string method except this repeat function. I will explain more about this type of methods or string methods in a separate video, so please wait for that as well. Now let's solve the star pattern one by one with my 4-step formula to solve any star pattern. So let's suppose I want to print this pattern first. So now I am going to tell you my 4-step formula one by one, and then we'll solve this pattern very quickly and easily. So pause this video here and take a screenshot of this 4-step formula, right? And here is the short form of that step. So let me increase the font a little bit. So our first step is we need to put this pattern inside a grid, and we need to analyze this pattern. So I have already put this pattern inside a grid. As you can see on your screen, there is a grid on this page, right? And the second step is to get numbers from this pattern. And the third step is to create general formula by using the numbers from the given pattern. And last, we need to apply the logic inside the VS Code. So let's work with the first step, that is grid and analyze. So I have already put it inside a grid. Let's analyze it. This is row 1, row 2, row 3 and row 4. Inside row 1, we have 1 times 2. Inside row 2, we have 2 times 2. Inside row 3, we have 3 times 2. And inside this row, we have 4 times 2. Here we need to put one more 2. Here 4 times 2. And inside each row, the number of 2 is incrementing by 1. And here the size of this pattern is 4. And I have already discussed with you that this pattern is commonly known as I. This is a constant, right? By the way, this is also the value of I, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And now I have analyzed this pattern very well. Now let's work with the second step, that is get numbers from this pattern. So in this pattern, the first number is the size of this pattern. So let's write here, size is equal to 4, right? Because of there is 4 rows and there is a constant 2. So let's write this number as well, constant 2. And the number of I here 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's write I equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. But similar to this pattern, we have also a same pattern over here, right? So let's say this time j is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. And here I am incrementing the number of 2 1 each time. So let's write it as well. So constant 2 and 1. So I have completed the second step as well. That is, I have get some numbers from this given pattern. Let's work with the third step, that is create a general formula. And I have already told you that if we get this type of pattern, that means we have to use loops. So in this pattern, we have 2 individual entities, right? That means we have to use one loop for row and another loop for printing the sign of 2 or number 2, right? And I have already discussed one thing with you as well, that we can also use a repeat function to repeat a certain string multiple times. right? So why not we use one loop to print this row, and instead of using second loop to print this sign, I'm going to use what? Repeat function. So let's work with the first loop, that is outer loop. So here the size of this loop is what? 4, and we need to increment the value of I from 1 to 4. So let's write a condition, I is less than equal to size, that is 4, right? So let's write here size, and need to increment the value of I in each iteration, and this I is going to start from what? 1. So this will be the expression or 3 expression inside the for loop, and inside this parenthesis we need to use repeat function to repeat the number of 2 according to the I. Let's write 2 and a space as a string, and on this string I am going to use a repeat function. How many times? In the first row we need to print 1 times. So here the value of I is 1, then we need to print how many times? 2? 1 time, that is I, and that's it. It will be the condition to print 2. If the value of 2, then this string will be printed how many times? 2 times. If the value of 3, then this string will be printed 3 times. And I have successfully created a general formula to print this pattern. Now let's see inside the VS Code. So let's define the size of pattern, that is 4. Const size is equal to how many times? 4 times. Let's use a for loop and need to increment from 1. Let I is equal to start from 1. I is less than equal to how many times? Size times, that is 4. And in the each iteration going to increment the value of I, that is I plus plus. Instead of using second loop or nesting loop, I am going to use a repeat function, right? Let 2 is equal to 2 and a space, and on this string I am going to use what? Repeat function or method, right? How many times? I times, and just print the value of 2, and that's it. If you still did not understand my explanation, then let me know in the comment box and we'll come back to you. By the way, I'm putting my 100% hard work to explain these questions to you as much as possible, right? Now the time's come for the challenge. So in this challenge number 7, you have to print the same pattern but using nesting loops. In this challenge, you do not need to use this repeat function. Instead, you have to use one more loop inside this outer loop. Let's pause this video and try to solve this pattern by yourself, and then continue this video from here. And I hope you have successfully solved this pattern as well. If not, then head over to the description box of this video and see the GitHub repository. Now let's move ahead, right? Now we have another challenge for you. Let me draw the pattern first. So here is the pattern, and try to solve this pattern by yourself. This is very similar to last pattern. So you can use any of those techniques. That means you can use repeat function or nesting loop as well. It totally depends on you. Pause this video and try to solve it yourself. And I hope you have solved this pattern successfully. So now let's move on to the next type of pattern. Let me draw the pattern first and then we'll solve this pattern, right? So here is the pattern. Pause this video and take a screenshot of this my 4-step formula to solve any star pattern. And this is the short form of my 4-step formula. Let me increase the font a little bit. So our first step is we need to put this pattern inside a grid and analyze this pattern, right? So I have already put this pattern inside a grid. Now let's move on to the next step, which is analyze. So did you notice one thing? In this pattern, we have to print 2 things. The first thing is that a star sign. And second thing is that there is a space as well in this pattern, right? So this pattern has 2 things. The first one is need to print a space and a star sign as well. Let me analyze in depth. So let's erase these things from here. Similar to previous one, let's suppose this is a row 1, row 2, row 3, and row 4. Row 1 has 3 space and 1 star. Row 2 has 2 space and 2 star. Row 3 has 1 space and 3 star. Row 4 has 0 space and 4 star. And here the number of star sign is incrementing by 1 in each iteration. And the number of space sign is decrementing by 1 in each iteration. Let me change the pen. And this behavior is known as what? I. That means, let's suppose this is a loop number 2, because there is also a same behavior over here. Let's suppose loop number 1. And in each iteration, we have to print two things, a space and a star sign. Let's work with the second step, that is getting number from this pattern or from this behavior. So the first number is the size of this pattern, which is 4, right? So let's write size is equal to 4. And because of there are two i's or loop, so we need to write I 1, 2, 3, 4, and j is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, and there is also a constant, that is 1. So let's write a constant as well, constant. And because we need to print this sign, so we need to use this sign as well. And now you do not need to think beyond this number to solve this pattern. Use this number, just hit and trial according to your logic and your ability. And then after practicing, after some times, you will get the actual solution of this pattern. Let's work with the third step, that is getting formula. So first I am going to work on this space pattern, right? So how can we print this space in this pattern? So in row 1 we have 3 space. Row 2 we have 2 space. Row 3 we have 1 space. And row 4 0 space. So now this time we have to practice or apply our logic or ability to get this output by using these given numbers. So I think you are getting my point. Why not we subtract 4 minus 1, 4 minus 2, 4 minus 3 and 4 minus 4 in each iteration, and then we can easily get this output. So let me write over here, what is the value of size? That is 4. So let's write 4 minus I, that is 1, equals to 3, right? And 4 is the value of size. So let me generalize this formula as well. Size minus what? I, and that's it. We get our formula to print a space in this pattern. Size minus I, that is 2. Because in the second iteration, the value of I will be incremented by 1. Now the output will be 2. And this is matching as our requirements. 4 minus I, that is 3, and we'll get 1. 4 minus 4, that is 0. So this is the general formula to print a space in this pattern. Now let's work with this star pattern, right? And trust me, printing the star sign is very easy. Pause this video here and try to think it yourself, right? Now I'm going to print this star sign in this pattern. So it's so simple, because in the first iteration or in the first row there is 1 space, 2, 3, 4 according to the rows. Did you notice one thing? In row 1 we have 1 star, row 2 we have 2 star, row 3 has 3 star, row 4 has 4 stars, right? So why not we print the number of star according to this I, because this is I at the end of the day, right? So why not, let's write a star dot repeat and pass I. If the value of I is 1, then it will print 1 time. If the value of I is 2, then it will print how many times? 2 times, right? And so on. Now we have created our general formula to print the space as well as a star sign. We have to work with the last step, that is apply this logic inside a code. So let's write this code inside VS Code. So first thing is that we have to define the size of the pattern, which is 4. So let's define const size is equal to 4 and need to use a loop. Let I is going to start from 1 and I is less than or equal to the value of size, that is 4. So let's write over here size, and in the each iteration the value of I will be incremented by 1. So first I'm going to print the number of spaces using repeat function. So let's write let spaces is equal to space, and on this string going to use a repeat function. How many times it will be repeat? That is size minus I times. And the next one is let print the star. So let star is equal to a star sign, going to use a repeat function as well. How many times? That is I times. And that's it. We just need to print these two values as a single string, clg spaces plus star. Let's run it, and here is the output. So now times come for the challenge. Instead of using 2 times repeat function, now you have to use 2 times for or while loop inside this outer loop, and that is your challenge. You have to print the same pattern but using 2 another nesting loops inside these outer loops, right? So pause this video and try to solve this challenge as yourself, and I hope you have successfully solved this pattern as well. If not, then please head over to the description box of this video and see the GitHub repository. So now let's move on to the next one. Now let's draw the pattern very quickly and then we'll solve it later, right? So here is the pattern. Now let's solve this pattern by using my 4-step formula. By the way, you can take a screenshot of this 4-step formula, and here is the short form of this formula, right? Now let's work with the first step, that is grid and analyze. That means we have to put this pattern inside a grid and need to analyze it as well. So let's analyze it, right? Let's suppose this is a row 1, row 2, row 3 and row 4. Did you notice one thing? Similar to previous pattern, we have to print a space as well, right? So in row 1 we have to print 3 space and 1 star. In row 2 we have to print 2 space and 3 star. Inside row 3 we have to print 1 space and 5 star. And the last row has 0 space and 7 star. Is it clear to you? Right? The number of stars is incrementing by 2 in each iteration, while the number of space is decrementing by 1 in each iteration. Now in this pattern is also very similar behavior just like previous ones. For example, let's say this one. The number of rows is incrementing by 1 in each iteration, and the number of spaces is decrementing by each iteration. And finally, in this pattern, the number of star is also incrementing by 2 in each iteration. Here, incrementing by 2. In this behavior, this is decrementing by 1 and it is also incrementing by 1. So, let's suppose this is a loop 1, loop 2, loop 3. Because we are getting some behavior just like a iterator, right? And now we have completed the first step. Now let's work with the second step, that is getting numbers from this pattern. So our first number from this pattern will be the size of this pattern, that is 4. So let's write size equal to 4 because there is 4 row as well, and the number of I, j or a constant as well, right? So let's write over here I is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, and j is equal to 3, 2, 1 and 0, and a constant 2, and take 1 as well as a constant because it is decrementing by 1, and we have collected some number from this pattern. Now let's work with the third step, that is getting general formula to print the star sign and spaces as well, right? So now let's print the space first and then we'll work with a star sign. So inside R1 we have how many spaces? 3 spaces. R2 has 2 space, R1 has 1 space, and R3 has 1 space, and R4 has 0 spaces. So how can we get this output? By using these numbers. Pause this video and try to think. How can we get this output by using these given numbers? So I think it's so simple for you. Why not let's subtract size minus I in each iteration. Let me write over here 4 minus 1, that is 3, and we are getting 3. 4 minus 2, that is 2. 4 minus 3, that is 1. And 4 minus 4, that is 0. And we are getting our output. So let me write a general formula. So this is the value of size, right? So let's write over here size minus, because I am using minus in this expression, right? And this is the value of I, so let's write I. The general formula to print a space in this pattern will be size minus I. Now let's see how can we print the star sign in this pattern, right? So now let's work with this problem. So inside R1 we have 1 star, R2 has 3 star, R3 has how many star? 5 star, and R4 has 7 star. So now pause this video and try to think how can we get this number or this output by using the given number. We have constant I, J, 4 and 1. So try to hit and trial by using the given number and then continue this video from here. So now I am also going to use a technique that is hit and trial method. In order to get 1 as an output, why not subtract 4 minus 3? Let's suppose 4 minus 3 is equal to 1, and in the next iteration the value of I will be decremented by 1, that is 2. Let's see, 4 minus 2 is 2, and here our requirement output is not matching with this result. So it will not going to work in this pattern, right? Let's try another technique, right? Now I'm going to write the required output 1, 3, 5 and 7, and here we need to do some calculation by using the given number in order to get our required output or desired output, right? So in the first row we want 1 by using this given number. So let's write 2 minus 1, because 2 is a constant. I am using 2 over here, right? 2 minus 1, that is 1, I am getting, right? And here we need to use again 2 and minus, let's say 2. 2 minus 2 is 0, right? Why not multiply the value of I? Here the value of I will be 2. Here the value of I will be what? 1. So 2 into 1 minus 1, that is 1. 2 into 2 minus 2, it will again not working. But we can also use this constant, right? So instead of using 2, let's write a constant over here. Let me remove it. So let's write a constant 1. So need to decrement in each iteration by 1. So 2 into 2 minus 1 is 3, perfect. 2 is also constant, and this is the value of I incrementing by 1. 2 into 3 minus 1 is 5. Let's check for last one. 2 into 4 minus 1, that is 7, and perfect. We have generated or created our general formula to solve this pattern. Let me write general formula over here. 2 is a constant, so let's write 2 into, and this is the value of what? I. So let's write I minus, and this is also constant, so 1. So here is our general formula to print a star in this pattern, and this is the general formula to print a spaces. This is for a star. So without further ado, let's see inside the VS Code. So first thing first, we have to define the size of this pattern, that is 4. So let's define const size is equal to 4. Need to use a loop, that is for. Let I is going to start from 1 and it will go till size, that is 4. And inside each iteration I am going to increment the value of I, that is I plus plus. Now here we have to print two things. The first one is spaces. So let's define a space, and on this string I am again going to use a repeat function. How many times we need to repeat? That is size minus I times. Let's store the number of star as well. Let star, and on this string again I am going to use what? Repeat function, that is 2 into I minus 1. Let me concatenate both of the string, that is spaces plus a star, and that's it. Let me run it, and boom, here is the output. Now times come for the challenge. Instead of using 2 times repeat function, now we have to use 2 more for loops inside this outer for loop, right? And print the same pattern as well. Pause this video and try to solve it yourself. If not, then head over to the description box of this video and see the respected GitHub repository. So let's talk about the one of the most popular pattern, which is diamond pattern. And trust me, this is one of the great pattern or example to get some numbers or behavior from this pattern. So let me draw first and then we'll talk about it, right? So here is the pattern, right? Now let me show you my first formula on your screen. So pause this video and try to take a screenshot of this formula. And here is the short form of this forest formula, right? So in this forest formula, we have to put this pattern inside a grid and then we need to analyze this pattern, right? So I have already put this pattern inside a grid. So let's analyze this pattern. So let's say this is a upper part of this pattern and this is a second or lower part of this pattern. So let's say this is upper and this is lower, right? And this lower pattern is totally depends on this upper pattern, right? If the upper pattern has 4 rows, then the lower pattern has 3 rows. Let me clean a little bit. So in this pattern, we have to use 2 separate loops. One loop for this pattern and second loop for this lower pattern. And then we can write or put those 2 loops one by one, right? And in result, we can get our resultant output. So let's work with the first pattern, that is upper pattern. But I have already discussed about this pattern in this video. So I'm not going to talk about this same pattern again and again, right? So this time try to solve this pattern by yourself and then continue this video. So now let's work with the second step, that is getting numbers from this given pattern, right? So let's say this is R1, R2, R3 and R4. And now I am going to counting this lower pattern separately again. This is also R1, R2 and R3. If the upper pattern has 4 rows, then the lower pattern has how many rows? 3. We need to put this number, that is, let's say size is equal to 4. But in this pattern, we have to put size equal to how much? Size minus 1, that is 3. So because of we are going to work in this pattern, so let's say here the size is equal to size. That means when you are solving this upper pattern, then you have to put size is equal to how much? 4. But during solving this lower pattern, you have to put size is equal to size minus I. Got it? Let me draw this lower pattern separately, right? Alright, now let's work with the second step, that is getting numbers from this pattern, right? So let me paste that first formula, complete this step, then we are going to work on this second step, right? So let me analyze it or getting some numbers. So inside R1, let me write first R1, R2 and R3. Inside R1, we have 0 spaces and 5 star st, right? Inside R2, we have 1 spaces and how much star? P star. Inside the last row, 2 spaces and 1 star. So here the size of this pattern will be 3, and I have already discussed with you how we can get this number, that is size minus 1. So our first formula will be this. From here I am going to initialize this pattern, and because of we are printing row in each iteration, so we need a loop over here. So loop 1, and here I am also going to increment the number of spaces by 1 in each iteration, right? So we can also use a loop over here. So let's say loop 2, and here the number of star is decrementing by 2 in each iteration, so it will be a constant. So in our case the value of the size will be 4 minus 1, that is 3 for this pattern. So let me write over here, our first value will be 3 because size minus 1, and because of we are going to increment the iteration from 3, so we need to decrement the value of I in each iteration. So here we need to decrement the value of I from 3 to 1, 0, and so on according to our requirements. So we have also some constants over here, right? So let's write constant is equal to 2 and 1. I can also put this pattern as I or j, k, but let it be for now, because as you already know, I love to use repeat function instead of using multiple nested loops. So we have some numbers, and by using this number we can create some formula to print this pattern. So now let's work with on this space behavior, right? So inside R1 we have 0 space, R2 have 1 space, and R3 have how many space? 2 spaces. So how can we get this output? By using these given numbers. So try to think by yourself, otherwise you can continue this video from here, right? So we can get this number by subtracting size minus I in each iteration. If I subtract 3 minus 3 in the first iteration, we will get 0. In second iteration, 3 minus 2, that is 1. In the third iteration, 3 minus 1, that is 2, and so on. 3 minus 3, 3 minus. This is our required output, right? Let me generalize it. So 3 is the value of size. So let's write here size minus, and this is I. Let's write I, and here is our formula to print spaces in this pattern. Now let's see how we can print the star in this pattern. So in this pattern we have 3 rows, R1, R2, R3. R1 has 5 star, R2 has 3 star, and R3 has 1 star. So let's see how we can get this output. So first I am going to write this output like this, 5, 3, 1, and here I am going to put is equal to. Here we need to put some logic to get this output by using this given number. So first here I need 5. So how we can get 5 by using this number? So somewhere in this formula we need to use 2, because here the value of a star will be decrementing by 2 in each iteration. And what should I do over here? Let me think a little bit. Why not multiply 2 into this I, that is 3. Here the value of I will be decremented by 1, that is 2 and 1. 2 into 3 is 6, and here we need 5. so need to decrement 1. 2 into 2 is 4, need to decrement 1, and that's it. We are getting our output by using this formula, right? So let me generalize this formula as well. This is a constant, so let's write 2 into 3 to 1 is a variable I, so let's write I, and minus 1 is also constant. So this is the formula to print a star in this pattern, and this formula is used to spaces in this pattern. Now let's see inside the VS Code very quickly. So here I have already covered the upper part of our required or resultant pattern, right? So let's work with the lower part. So first again I have to define a for loop. Here I have to initialize this loop one less than the size, right? So let's write I is equal to size minus 1, because in the lower part we have to print 3 rows. That's why I'm decrementing the size minus 1, and this time the value of I is going to from 3 to 1, and in each iteration the value of I will be decremented by 1. So here first time I am using decrement operator. Inside this parenthesis we have to print again 2 things. The first one is a space and the second one is a star. So now let's first print a spaces. So a space, and on this string I am again going to use what? Repeat function. Here I have to pass size minus I. Let's work with the star sign, and on this string again I am going to use what? Repeat function. Here 2 into I minus what? 1, and that's it. Let's concatenate both of the string, that is CLG space plus a star sign, and that's it. Let me run it, and here is the output. If I did not decrement by 1, let me show you. Here this line is printing 2 times. So to ignore this line we have to use minus 1, right? And this time it will work as expected. So now times come for the challenge. Here instead of using 2 times loop or 2 times loop in the upper part, you have to use 2 child loops inside this outer loop, and the rest 2 child loops can be nested in this loop, right? So now pause this video and try to solve it yourself. Otherwise head over to the description box of this video and see the GitHub repository, right?
I have put a lot of efforts, more than 20 days, into creating this video, covering everything related to loops and their types. If you enjoyed this ride and learned something new, it's your time to shine. Hit that subscribe button, give the video a thumbs up, show some love. It's a small gesture, but it means world to me. If you don't support by subscribing to this channel and liking to this video, it's not a fair game. Let's keep this community thriving. Your support fuels more content like this. And trust me, I am itching to create more videos just like this one. But still, if you have doubt in this video, then let me know in the comment box and we'll come back to you as soon as possible. By the way, if you prefer Twitter, then you can catch me there too. The link is given in the description box of this video. Thanks for watching.